Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another channel map. This channel map is for the month of December in the year of 2020. I can't believe 2020 is actually almost over. That is a crazy sort of sentence to say. Time has really flown. And we're going to talk about a bit about November, how things went, because a lot of stuff happened in November. And then we're going to talk about the plans going forward for this channel, for the second channel. That's more about CSGO and esports content. And of course, we're going to talk a bit about what's going to happen in the future and for Brood War content development and all sorts of other stuff. So, starting with a recap, we're going to be talking about the month of November and how we kicked things off. Obviously, we were just finishing up the mod stream streak and obviously full toilet development for my really crazy Ahmed campaign that didn't really even have any content in it at the end of the day. There was content. There was no like story dialogue or anything like that. It was all inferred. Actually, one of the things that's kind of cool about that is that you got to pick whatever race you wanted to play in any one of those missions, which I unironically think is almost like the future of Mapcraft stuff for me, is just so that as long as I'm using Hydra anyway, just so that players can sort of opt into whatever they want to. But I'm not 100% sure how willing I am to necessarily stick to that, but I just like the idea of being able to just pop in and pick my race in that sense. It could be cool. So, with that said, obviously the playthroughs happened relatively early on as well. I think it was the 4th or something like that when I actually went live with that. Maybe it was the 3rd and the 4th. After that, I started working on or resumed scenario development. I had been working on an ice map previously ice map between Full Toilet and then the next map crap, and then the next map crap hit and I worked on a desert map. And we've just been trucking along with Hydra development. We've been trucking along with some maps and whatnot. And actually, another thing that sort of happened to resume was Fraud Knights working in the context of StarCraft as well. So we actually decided to separate out Fraud Knights for Counter-Strike, which we call Fraud Strike, and then Fraud Knights for Brood War or Hydra, which we call Fraud Craft. And those happen every Saturday and Sunday respectively. So Saturday for CSGO, FPS stuff, and obviously Sunday for Brood War and Hydra and whatever else. So, excuse me. The bulk of the work that we were able to take a look at in the month of November, related to Hydra anyway, was obviously on the game state, updating a lot of things. Eventually the mega patch hit. I think the mega patch was before? That might have been like early days for that. I think because my Full Toilet submission, which was released in the month of November, obviously had a lot of the work that went into it, obviously was related to the game state. And so I think that the game state only actually got updated to that version after some bug fixes and stuff after the fact. So like my Full Toilet submission was almost a preview of the mega patch in a way. So at that particular case, when we have a situation where this has been like shrouded in not necessarily mystery, but just like not really been fully released to the public with the development cycle and stuff. Stuff like that is definitely interesting to take a look at. And one of the things that kept happening that's still a pernicious issue now is, of course, the lovely fucking bugs that we have where we just desync if we have different vision on extended units and whatnot. So we were able to partially fix that problem during the month of November through desync testing. And just recently today, Iquare and I started looking into some additional things. We sort of triaged the issue further, and because we thought we had fixed it, but we only fixed one facet of it. We figured out what the other facet actually was. The problem is that actually fixing it is going to take some really interesting programming ethics and may introduce additional bugs. So we have to sort of wait for that to unfold before us. But by the end of this month, I think we should certainly know a little bit more about that. It's unfortunate that 2+ months of development time have had to be centered in some part. I would say a non-trivial amount of work has gone into it across now 2 months, or will have by the end of this month, just to fix some desyncs that we get no debug information on. Pretty epic. So, bearing that in mind, that's sort of where the focus of Hydra will be. One of the ways that I like to conceptualize Hydra development in the months of, the months of Full Toilet development leading up to November, was we were establishing a better framework or foundation that we could then build upon, that we could then revise, and we were sort of figuring out the shape of Hydra's tech trees. It was taking shape as we added more things and revised more unit roles and whatnot. And now we're in a stage where we can really, really heavily focus on revision and making the most out of the concepts, like refining them to the point where we are much closer to a well-polished game state that has a lot of different counterplay and very deep sort of pool of assets to pick from and all that stuff. So ultimately, I think we're already leaps and bounds ahead of where we were before the mega patch hit. I do think that the mega patch was a good push in the right direction, especially with the upgrade stuff and some other things that just added a lot of flexibility to the strategies that you could employ. However, we are going to be looking to obviously sand off the rough edges, which means revising edge cases and refining some units that are just not as useful, or maybe units that are too useful, or units that are sleeper OP that we just then discover, sort of like what happened with Wendigos at a recent Friday night. So there's all sorts of different things there that we could discuss. But suffice it to say, I think that Hydra's in a better place than it has been, and at this point we can really focus heavily on refining the game states. We don't think that there's going to be massive changes that are going to completely, shift the sort of balance or the way that you would design maps, I guess is the best way to put it, such that I think we can actually resume scenario development with some confidence that whatever decisions that we end up making as we discovered the best way to make maps for Hydra, those decisions will still be correct decisions once the rough edges are completely sanded off and we've refined everything to its full extent. That is possible within the Brood War engine anyway. And we can continue to update our process for developing maps and the decisions that we're making as time goes on. But ultimately, this is sort of the headspace that I'm at. I think at this point we can go back to making some of the campaign levels, making some more melee maps as well, just so that we have more to pick from on Fraud Nights. And when we can have different team allocations for the players so that we can actually have more than 4 human players in a game because of the desync issues being resolved, that would be great as well. And that'll also open up some interesting possibilities. I would also like to update Stormborn and do some other stuff. I talked about this a little bit in the previous log, but I just want to, in general, provide more content for the players to experience in a single player capacity or otherwise, such that they can sort of tide themselves over until we get that new engine up. And more on that development later on. Obviously, the new engine development didn't technically start yet in a real sense, at least in a public facing sense. We're still figuring some things out behind the scenes, so to speak. And that is going to continue in the early days of December, but I do hope to actually get some streams started where we're actively developing it in some sort of public view, so that not only can people see that we're actually doing it, but also that we can keep ourselves honest and keep ourselves on task in that regard. Obviously, that will sort of vary depending on how frequently I'm doing work on the second channel, how frequently I'm planning on doing work on Hydra, and how frequently I'm doing other things on the main channel, like streaming Let's Plays or producing other content like what you're watching now. But that is sort of the plan going forward. So aside from all the Hydra stuff and the Fraud Night stuff, there was some other content that was publicated to this channel, including the Inconsummate Dev Diary, the 6-hour-long video, pretty epic. And then, of course, following, or in addition to that, we also had the Street Dog podcast launch with Dynamo, of which we've done 2 episodes, and we're trying to plan out the third one as we speak, basically. I'm just waiting on some responses and stuff, and we're trying to figure out scheduling. The aim for that podcast will eventually have some guests on, I think, as time goes on, and people might have some particular topics that they'd like to talk about. I think we'll probably await other people approaching us as opposed to like seeking other people out, though that may also happen depending on the situation. But I figured I would mention that anyway because it's a nice little sort of continuation of the podcast content in a similar style to the Big Boys Table in that way. And I think that should be perfectly fine in theory. I don't see any issues with the way that we've been developing that so far. Initially, I had approached Dynamo to do some content on the second channel about Doom mapping, but he had not been up to date in the same way that he has in the past with that. So we decided to instead do something a bit more general and a bit more, in some ways, niche, as paradoxical as that is, but just a little bit less focused and a little bit more loose, we'll say, similar to the Big Boys Table. And we put that on the main channel. So hope you guys have been enjoying that. I think we'll have a lot of more interesting conversations, and we've already started off with some pretty good ones, I think. Going into the actual second channel developments, obviously, we had 2 talk shows that were live that were sort of launched in the month of November, I believe. One of them was The Metal Makers, which is an analytical show. I'm actually going to be recording or streaming another one of those later on today as of the day of recording this. And aside from that, we also had a mapping focused show. The first person mapper show is essentially meant to be a dive into FPS mapping, as the sort of the name implies. We're not going to be limiting ourselves to CS. I believe our second episode is actually going to be talking to people from Black Mesa's development team, for example, and we're going to talk about the Source engine and some limitations there and how they sort of navigated it. And I think that will potentially be useful for getting another set of developers' opinions on going into sort of a development set where you know that there are some limitations and you have to sort of work around them, because obviously that's something that I can sympathize with very heavily. But another thing that I think will be really interesting about the Black Mesa conversation is, obviously, I'm personally very critical of Black Mesa, but I also recognize that it's sort of that weird gray area between a mod hobby project like what Hydra is, essentially, and a fully released project or product like Half-Life 1 or Half-Life 2. I guess the distinction there is that you're actually paying money for Black Mesa, so it is a bit more of a product on the product line of things. But in terms of its development cycle, from what limited information I have gleaned just recently, apparently like a lot of people were cycling in and out, and it was a little bit more like, people were coming on based on their merit, but also based on their interest in the project, which I think the latter doesn't always happen in the industry. And so I think it'll be interesting to sort of go behind the scenes in the process of recruitment and development processes that sort of evolved over time, and they've had to build their own tools in some respect as well, which is very, very similar to what we've had to do in the Brood War space. So a surprising number of parallels there. So even though I'm not a fan of the project myself in terms of the quality of the product that they were able to put out, I think it'll still be an interesting conversation to have, and hopefully everybody else will also agree who tunes in and checks it out. So still planning my questions for that. We don't even have a date set for that yet, but that's an example of some of the content that you'll be able to see on the other channel. And I guess that'll be the first content that I'm really like pushing away from the Counter-Strike label as well, although it is loosely connected with it being a Source engine game and a bunch of other stuff like that. But it's the first content that I'm going to be producing about a single player title, first content that I'm going to be producing about something that isn't Counter-Strike on that channel. So it'll be pretty interesting, I think. And we'll have to see where that goes, basically. Obviously, as a result of the focus on the second channel in the month of November, I was very, very focused on that, and I did not have as much time to spend on main channel videos, which is why you saw a bit of a slow on the Crowpill series, a bit of a slow on the Dad Cause even, and why, to an extent, we had a 1 day delay for the December channel map, just because I was trying to figure out a bunch of other stuff and still scheduling and still trying to solve the problem of essentially balancing my time between multiple channels, and obviously also the Brood War project work and everything else that I do is a sort of a more of a hobby level. So there's been some interesting time concessions and constraints, but I do think that we're getting to the point where by the end of this month, surely, scheduling is something that I do want to continue working on. I've been making strides in that. I think it's just about limiting my sort of output on both channels, like sort of respective of one another, and also considering what I feel like doing more content of, but also considering the availability of other people. The second channel doesn't really have the same self-reliance as this channel does. There's some content like the map analyses that I can do by myself, either streamed or recorded. But a lot of the other content, I just haven't gotten to the point where I can comfortably set up and do some solo content on that channel, something like the Crowpill series in a way, but more slanted towards CSGO or esports content in general, which is, I guess, more like the Thor and Slot series, if you're familiar at all with that, something to that effect. Now, in general, I do think that there's still some value that I could add in that space, doing that kind of content for that kind of scene. But I just need to get to the point where not only do I have like the graphics set up, which is like the super basic stuff that I can just come up with something basic and if I absolutely need something like that, that's not really a real limiting factor. But beyond that, beyond the surface level things, I also do need to think a little bit more deeply about it, because it's just a scene that I don't have as many years of experience thinking analytically and deeply about it, the same way that the Crowpill series is like right up my alley, because it's an area of expertise, we can say. And also, as I've leveled up my thinking in general, in all contexts, I've been able to phrase my opinions in better ways, and that's something that I think the later Crowpills actually have done a bit better than the earlier ones. But as we continue on that series, I think that'll only get more apparent. So as we continue on, and as we continue evolving as an individual, as a creator, you'll probably see more solo content on the second channel as sort of like a just a way to continue to put out content without relying on the availability of other people necessarily, especially when you get to the point where you're getting like 2 or 3 people, maybe even 4 people trying to align their schedules for something like a talk show, especially something that's live streamed. It gets a little messy. It gets a little difficult. So I'm at this point mostly focused on trying to build up my own personal expertise and analysis and thinking sort of concepts and paradigms and pillars and all those other buzzwords. I'm trying to get my thinking on the same level as some of the other people in the space. And one of the ways to actually do that is just to start doing the content. So expect that a little bit sooner rather than later. But as a result of them being more solo oriented, it should open up a little bit more of the schedule, because those videos are not going to be as long as the longer interviews or talk shows. And then I can sort of scale back on the longer form content, put out the shorter form, but still impactful analytical content that is not reliant on somebody else being there. And I think that'll be a strong starting position, basically. So hopefully that all made sense. And yeah. Oh, one of the other points that I wanted to make when I brought up the Inconsummate Dev Diary is obviously that you may have noticed we started working on the Dead Space 2 Let's Play very recently, yesterday, as of the day of recording this. And one of the things that the Dead Space 2 Let's Play reminded me of is actually how much, how fun an experience can be. Not be the game, like the game is actually really bad, but the experience of collectively sort of like reacting to the absurdity of the experience you're having. While you're doing it live and with other people, like there's an element to that I have indeed missed. And so I'm not going to be able to say necessarily that I can promise more content like that on a more regular basis, but I do think there is going to be value in jumping into that sort of experience more often. So just a bit of a teaser, I suppose, just some thoughts on that. And obviously not directly related to November, since it was already December when I started that playthrough, but just figured I would mention that. All right, on to the plans for December. We're going to talk about the Brood War plans. Obviously, Inconsummate Map 1 is still on my mind, especially after closing out the Inconsummate video. That's something that I do want to do. I'll probably wait until the ice map that I've been working on is finished. It's a nice little experience, exercise in level design. And then maybe I'll take a look at what I actually want to do with the Inconsummate Map 1, what the scope of it's going to be exactly. And I definitely won't be doing more than one map, because I'm more eager to just move on and make other content, maybe in the same universe, maybe not. That is like a fully fledged campaign, as opposed to worrying about trying to keep things up to date or whatever, and constantly updating, an older project. That's not really my cup of tea anymore. I think I've reached a nice conclusion towards the end of that Inconsummate developer diary that reminded me of what really should be the priority there. So I've been pretty happy about that. When it comes to the Brood War engine updates and the continued Hydra development, that still is something that we're working on. Obviously, I talked a little bit earlier about the desyncs and stuff. Hope to have those resolved by the end of the month. And ideally, we can go into 2020 with a functioning multiplayer experience. Ideally, also like triaging some of those harder to nail down crashes, which basically just relies on iQuare being around while all the debug is attached to somebody who got the crash. And, you only get so many chances where all of those stars can align. So we'll have to wait and see in that respect. And of course, aside from that, I also want to jump into the RTS development. The website did get additional updates in the month of November. I did forget to mention that during the recap. I've been feeling pretty good about where that is, and Vik and I successfully collaborated with another Polish man named Adam, also known as Frenzy on the Discord server, and he was able to put together some really nice icons for us to use. And it took some iteration, but it's gotten there, and I feel like it's in a really good spot now. And we'll have to see what else can be done in terms of an organizational standpoint, so I expect it to get some non-trivial updates in the month of December as well, but it's for the most part taken care of, and we have a nice sort of a framework in terms of the functionality of the code base that we can then recycle for, say, iQuare wants to host his Overlord tech tree on the site. That could be something that he could do. If somebody else comes up with a high enough, a well put together melee mod that they also want to showcase the tech trees for, or something to that effect, could also happen. I know DF has been working on stuff sort of quietly, so to speak, and that might also be something. But yeah, ultimately, it's just a nice thing to have a real website, and like I keep saying, it's way better than I could have imagined. So hopefully the RTS engine is also the same. You know what I mean? So yeah. We're going to definitely get started on that in the month of December. The degree to which public development is going to happen, still undetermined, but at least one stream. Surely, at least one stream. Moving on to video plans. Obviously, Dead Space 2 has already started. I aim to finish that and then get the review out, ideally before the first half of December is over, so that I can comfortably start on the next video series, which I do believe still will be Huncraft. That was what it was slated to. I was very demotivated to work on it and play through it after seeing just a flash from DK's playthrough. But I might as well give it a shot. Like, the worst thing that can happen is I do the first couple of videos or whatever, and then I quit because it's a waste of my time. And then we could just move on to something else. So we'll see how it goes. But that is also one of the last high-profile campaigns that I have not yet played. I think it might actually be the last high-profile campaign that I have not yet played. To which extent, like, maybe that means that I should just suffer through the whole thing. We'll have to wait and see. But try not to poison the well. Try not to have my expectations be so negative initially. But let's just say I have yet to play an actual campaign in StarCraft. So still waiting on that. All right, jumping over to Fear 2 is the other playthrough that I want to get started. That's a legit game playthrough that will definitely also be streamed. Huncraft might also be streamed. I'm not really sure yet. I guess I'll need somebody who's actually played it or watched a playthrough of it in more detail to tell me if it's absurd enough to be streamed or if it should just be something that it actually would be better to record. I have a feeling it's more on the stream side, though. That might help me get through it. It might help me stay sort of on point with it. But yeah, Fear 2 will definitely be live streamed, similar to Dead Space 2. I don't know why I decided to pick two games that I was, playing the sequels for. Apparently, Fear 1 was the only good one, which is unfortunate. We're going to see how bad Fear 2 actually is, if it is indeed that bad, or as bad as people are saying. That's another thing that I just have no experience with, much like Dead Space 2. So I didn't even play the demo for Fear 2. I played the demo for Dead Space 2. That was it. And that was years and years ago. So yeah, we're going to have to wait and see, I guess. And of course, there's going to be more esports and CSGO mapping content over on the second channel. Not really sure yet what all is going to happen, but as I mentioned during the recap phase, I do have plans to do some solo content, some additional solo content, not just the map analyses, but also like video editorials, basically. And hopefully we can also build up our brand enough to the point where people are easier to schedule for and say yes to. And that's just something that happens the more you do stuff. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, a pretty quick sort of recap there. I don't really have any other plans. I mean, obviously, I'm going to be making occasional Crowpail and Dadcaw videos as time goes on. However, in the far future, or farther future, obviously I talked about this earlier, it's pretty much the same stuff. It's video essays eventually, once I get to the point where, maybe we're cleared of the current backlog of video plans. But also, of course, Age of Empires is a streamed Let's Play opportunity, the first and second games. And I'm not sure how deep I'll go into the campaigns. I think I'll just play whatever was originally available. And then if I'm enjoying myself, I'll play some more. If I'm just fucking done, I will move on to the next game. But that'll be after Dead Space 2, Huncraft, and Fear 2. We'll jump into Age of Empires. Maybe after that, however long that fucking takes me, we can jump into some video essays or something like that. It really depends on if there's something else that I feel like playing. I think there probably will be another custom campaign for Brood War that I play or attempt to play between Fear 2 and Age of Empires 1. Not sure about which one that will be. Not sure if anybody really has any recommendations or whatever, but we'll see when we get there. All of the video plans that I mentioned there, Dead Space 2, Huncraft, Fear 2, I don't think we will actually get to the point where we're done with all of those, or even in the middle of the last one of those by the end of December. But those are the plans currently, and that's like the current backlog. That's what's going to be done next. So stay tuned for whenever that happens. So there you go. That's the update for December. That's the recap of November. And of course, I do indeed expect December to be just as productive as November. Of course, we also have Christmas coming up. Not sure how that'll impact things. I'll probably just take a couple days off, or maybe a day off of video content, the same way that I did with Thanksgiving, actually. But I mean, even on the day of Thanksgiving here in America, I was still working on Hydra and some other stuff behind the scenes. I just wasn't actually doing any video production. So that's pretty funny, I guess. But yeah, we'll see how things go. So stay safe, everybody. Have a good holiday season as we're approaching that, and enjoy the weather, I guess. I don't know. And that'll be it. So see you next time.